Okay, so I've got a little practice for us to do at the beginning to help teach us how to write effective thesis statements. So I know that you're like on your way to having a really great thesis statements, but I want to make sure that we know what we're doing and why they're the thesis. Yeah, and just look throughout for the same. No, I'll think like okay, so everyone has one of these goldenrod papers now. We'll pass them back. All right. So we talked last time about how you're focusing on a narrow argument that Frederick Douglass has. But I told you that it needs to be specific, like a narrow specific argument. So right here in 1, 2, and 3, I have given you kind of vague specific arguments. That's a weird way of saying that. Vague, narrow arguments, right? So it's not so vague that it is Frederick Douglass's argument that slavery is bad, because we all know not to put that in our essay. We know that we need to go a little bit more narrow about what area we are focusing on, right? So I've got 3 focuses here, but they're still pretty vague. It just says Douglass argues that slaves are dehumanized. How could we make that? What questions could we ask to make that one more specific? What questions could we ask about his treatment of or his dehumanization? Yeah. Okay, all right. So it could be about how are slaves dehumanized in the text, right? Yeah. Okay, so it could be a comparison question, like, okay, if they're dehumanized, how does that compare to how other people are treated in the text? Good. What other questions could we ask about that? I think we might be able to ask also like what kind of effect that has, or what justification that has, like why that would be the case. Okay, so you could ask a lot of different questions about this first one to make it more specific. I want you to think in your head, how can I make number 1 more specific, and then write down that argument in a more specific way. So adding to it. So I might say, Douglass argues that slaves are dehumanized. Okay, why are slaves dehumanized? Well, I think it's because it's a justification for their economic system, and it's a sort of like way that their greed and selfishness have been manifested. Okay, then I'm going to try and write that as a single argument that is more specific than just Douglass argues that slaves are dehumanized. That makes sense. It was probably a convoluted way of explaining it. But more specific.
So are we just restating the
Yeah, you're restating this argument, but in more detail. Okay, write it down on number 1. If you're not getting it, I have my example of how I did this. So you're writing number 1 just in more specific to us. I gotta fix this really quick.
Okay, you're just doing number one, but you can move on to number two. I'm going to show you now what this might look like. Okay, so for this dehumanization one, if you were trying to make that more specific, it can go in so many different ways. That's what's wrong with a vague argument, is that it can go in so many different ways. So your reader doesn't really know which way you're going to go with it. So for me, I'm going to take it in this direction. I say, Douglas argues that slaves are dehumanized in order to justify their position in a social hierarchy that results in the exploitation of their labor. So it's I've asked the question, why are they dehumanized? And I've answered that question in the argument to make it more specific. Okay, try doing number two now. Argues that education is important. How could you make that one more specific? Write it down. So quiet without JB. I don't know. I'm not sure.
It's kind of fair though. It's just shaking. Yeah.
No thanks. Right. Okay, for this one, I want you to share with your group that you normally work in. Share how you made yours more specific. I want you to see how everyone in your group might have a different way of doing this.
Okay, I said. Doesn't argue that power is no free man, as if making I'm still working on it.
Intellectually and
Yes, we need to share this. It's not
Douglas.
why would I say you?
Making him sound fancier. Okay, let me show you mine. I say Douglas argues that equal access to education will lead to equal academic achievement among the races. An economic system based on slavery is dependent on both white and Black ignorance. All right, so I want to show you this because I was hearing some that was a little more specific, right? Education is important because it leads to freedom, right? Or education is important because it frees the mind, you know? But I think you can add more to an argument to make it more specific, right? So if yours is still a little bit vague, see what you can add to it. And for everybody else, if you're feeling like, yep, that is super specific, move on to number 3. Okay, I'm gonna show you mine now. It says Douglas argues that through performative shows of piety, so like basically like virtue signaling, slave masters use their religion to maintain their moral standing in their communities, even when they execute brutal violence. So I'm talking more about exactly what they are justifying and how they're like performing that justification. Okay, so based on this and how we were turning the simple into something more complicated, I want you to open up the document where you were writing your thesis statement. How many people have a thesis statement written from last time? Yeah, like mostly. Okay, cool. So I want you to pair up with somebody. It could be a trio if you want. And you are going to offer each person that you're working with a question about their thesis to make it more specific. So read their thesis statement, read the argument portion of their thesis and ask them a question. Like, for example, with the Douglas argues that slaves are dehumanized. Why are they dehumanized? Or in what way are they dehumanized? Or how does that compare? These are just your questions. How does that compare to the treatment of other people? You're going to offer them one of those questions. And I'm saying offer them because that's going to help them make their argument more specific if it needs to be. So share thesis statements with somebody next to you and give a piece of feedback about how to make it more specific.
What? No, that was Thursday. That was Thursday.
Mine is just like just basically like that like slavery prevents no, you can hear them. So like, you know, something
I didn't know. Okay, read it one more time.
Okay, so remember, you got to give them feedback about how to make it more specific. If you don't give them feedback, if you just say that's good, you're being really mean to that person because you're not being generous with feedback. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the next assignment is writing a statement. And that will be
So just like.
I don't know.
Just like what? Really wants it. Okay, let's try to try
It shouldn't be, but so in the next few, I make sure that there are stars in there. Okay, I can make sure they're all stars in there. So that there's no count. Or you guys can show me like better grade it'll like that sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know how to make.
Yeah. Just like.
Like, because I think part is, think about that. He's arguing that.
I got nothing.
Why did you- I'm asking now, why did you say? So his audience are like, white people in the north, right? What is he trying to prove to white people in the north by showing us?
That their life is evolving.
Okay, so why, what are we doing on the
They're not treated like.
Okay, because that's wrong. I don't think I think there's something here about how, they justify their
I hate this.
you know,
Yeah.
because then it really gives that why.
My friend.
I
know.
So Frederick Douglass chose not to say it's not like.
Okay, I know everyone's sort of at different points, so if you continue to work on the thesis, that's fine, but let me tell you about the introduction now. So your intro, they should be fairly short, 4 to 6 sentences tops. That's including the thesis statement. And sometimes your thesis statements are 2 sentences. So you don't need these big, long intros. It's a rhetorical analysis. And the people who are going to read a rhetorical analysis, in this case me, they're kind of invested in the text already. So you don't need that hook kind of intro that like captures their attention right away and says something like, imagine you are Frederick Douglass himself. Like you don't need that kind of an intro. Instead, it's okay to write a pretty dry, informative introduction for these style of essays. So to do that, and I know it's been a long time since we talked about soapstones, and maybe we didn't even finish talking about soapstones in this class, but you're going to introduce the reader to the context. And so what you need to establish in the intro is, who is Frederick Douglass? What is this book he's writing and why is he writing it? And who is his intended audience? You are setting up the rhetorical triangle for your reader and saying, here is the rhetorical situation that you need to know about before I tell you my thesis statement. Since your thesis statements are more specific, you need some sort of transition into that specific thesis. So when you're talking about the purpose and who his audience is, you transition into, let's say you're talking about dehumanization. You transition into talking about dehumanization, or you transition into talking about Christianity or education or whatnot. And then the thesis is the last sentence or sentences of your intro. It's it's like the same paragraph as your introduction paragraph. So you give a little context. This is who Frederick Douglass is. This is the book he is writing. Here's who he's writing to. And ultimately, he is making these language choices for this purpose. So I'm going to leave this PowerPoint up here. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to work on an intro. Don't be afraid to use the internet to remind yourself of some of this context, what year it is, what's going on during this year, and so on. You also have notes somewhere where you were taking notes on the context for this book. It was a few weeks ago now, but they're somewhere in your binders. It was when we were going through and talking about what the situation was like when he was writing it. Okay, I'll give you 10 minutes to work on an intro. Use this time wisely.
I'm coming back.
So every time I read my thesis, I keep feeling like it gets worse every time. I don't know. That makes no sense. Andrew Powell isn't the how it leads to a life of freedom.
I like it. Let's see. Tell me this. What do you mean by parallelism, showing that education leads to a life of freedom? How does the parallelism work? Parallelism is in grammar, it's grammatically parallel structural. I can't say it. They're structured in a parallel way.
Okay.
So it's like, maybe it'll have noun, verb, object, and it'll be over and over again. So it gives this kind of rhythm to the sentence.
I'm sure there was one that
Stop.
Okay, cool.
but I can't remember what it was.
I think there's a great one when it's talking about.
Right there. Yeah, look down. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, not that one. That's the thing. Right there. Really quick, just make sure you don't have help around.
I saw nothing without seeing it. I heard nothing without hearing it, and felt nothing without feeling it. That's an example of parallelism. That's grammatical parallelism, and then there's parallelism in the stories too. If like certain things sort of repeat over and over again, and certain happens. So if that's grammatical parallelism. So how does education lead to a life of freedom for Douglas?
Well, he like picked up little bits and pieces of like ones that he's trying to use tomorrow.
Mhm.
So I feel like all that information he was able to gather, basically like, you know, he was self-taught, so he was able to self-teach.
Yeah. And how does that lead to freedom?
I was just like,
Okay, sorry.
all that knowledge is figuring out like how they speak, like, and with their knowledge, he was able to like understand like certain ways to escape.
Mhm.
Is that always an advantage?
Okay, so I just wrote down kind of what you said. It was like it provides him this kind of interaction with the white boys in his neighborhood. The information leads him to be able to understand and communicate with white people in a way that will eventually lead to his mistake or his escape, right? So the importance for education for slaves leads to a life of freedom through or by increasing communication between groups, maybe. Words of education for slaves and how it leads to a life of freedom by increasing communication between groups. Okay, the reason that I wrote it that way is because when you were explaining to me how it led to freedom, you were actually talking about physical freedom. You're not necessarily talking about freedom of science. You're saying it is freedom in the way that his body was able to be free because he was educated, right? Which I think is a super powerful message. And so when I added this little clause to the end, it's like the by increasing communication between groups is leading to the life of freedom. Because if you're talking to white boys, when I'm talking to white people, communication has to be
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so I thought the thesis was really strong as it was, but if you're wanting to make it slightly more specific, that makes sense to me to add that one.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and then you just delete what I wrote there. I was just tracking what you were saying.
And if someone tag
Are you getting good work done on your intros? Five more minutes for that, and I will check back in and tell you the next part.
What's another word for escaping?
Fleeing. That was a good one, or I'll look it up in the thesaurus.
Okay. Or like.
Break free. Abscond. Decamp. Vamoose. Don't use vamoose.
Perfect. You're like, I can't.
Awesome. And then there is the posters that are along this wall.
Yep.
And those are the ones that we got to be careful with the tape so we don't tear it. Thank you for doing this.
Yep.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, wait. Back towards it. I swear I caught like. Yeah. And that's why.
Yeah.
You were hanging on Jada. I'm like, okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know.
I'm so proud. Kind of why I was. Every time you. He's just staring at me as I'm sitting down. When everyone's staring, I laugh. So sprinting to my. Oh.
I think it's
Especially that.
Oh, good.
That's what
Why
I.
don't I'm just
Thesis.
Yeah.
So in that part, you're getting the structure. So for the intro part, you're doing all the content. So you don't have to talk about anything that happened before the intro. For the intro, you're like Frederick Douglass is your background, like there is like just kind of giving a little context so that your audience will understand. Yep. And then you kind of decide
Whoa. Yeah, okay. I think this might. Going down.
okay. Who, raise your hand if you've got a good start for an intro there. Okay, good job, good working. Okay, let's talk about paragraph structure. So all paragraphs, and we've talked about paragraph structure sort of generally, and the rules apply here as well. All paragraphs need a topic sentence. This is the part of Douglas's argument that you will be discussing in this paragraph. So before we get to the next part, this would be a bad topic sentence. Here we've got the paragraph that starts with a quotation. And when we start our paragraph with a quotation, I have no idea what this paragraph is going to be about. So it says, the fatal poison of irresponsible power was already in her hands and soon commenced its infernal work. In this quotation, Coates shows the way that slavery changed Mrs. Old for the worst. He uses a metaphor to describe how slavery changed slaveholders. So based on what they write after this quotation, I can kind of piece together what's going to be in this paragraph, but they as a writer can do such a better job telling me what to expect. So the paragraph is going to be about how Mrs. Old changed, and it's going to be about metaphors, right? So on your goldenrod paper, it says topic sentence right down here. It says on the PowerPoint, I will show you examples of poorly written paragraphs. Fix each part of the paragraph here. So you're going to fix their topic sentence. Write a topic sentence for this paragraph that will work so much better than just having it be the quotation. They want to talk about how Mrs. Old changed and how Frederick Douglass uses a metaphor to show that change. So write a topic sentence that will be about that instead of just a quotation. I am going to gather up these goldenrod papers, so do your best work and get some points. Everyone starts writing. Thank you. We kind of put them into a little pile for me, and we'll just put them right up here. Thanks. And that's all I have for you today. Okay, let me show you my topic sentence. Right here, I've got. 1 second. Hello. Hi. Sorry, I thought that's at 11:55. Oh, okay. All right, here's my topic sentence. I say metaphors are also used to show the negative change that came over slaveholders. Douglass describes how slavery changed Mrs. Old for the worst, saying the fatal poison of irresponsible power has already in her hands and was already in her hands and soon commences infertile work. So in that topic sentence, all I did was I just talked about the negative. This is actually someone else's work. I'm lying. That's what you wrote? Oh, that's awesome. This is actually a student work, but I looked at their real topic sentence and it was much better than the bad one that I gave. And it says metaphors are also used to show the negative change that came over slaveholders. That's awesome because it shows me exactly what you're going to be talking about in that paragraph, right? But the problem with this as it is that there is no citation. And you're talking about, it's not a long book, but I need to be able to find the page numbers where you are talking. So this one is on page 19. How would you add a citation in MLA to this sentence? And write down the citation. All I need you to write down is, let's do like this, infernal work, just that part, and then write the citation at the end and try and do it in correct MLA. How would you do it? Okay, you're writing this on the goldenrod paper. It's on page 19. Yes, they are up there in that box.
Run. Run. Oh my.
Steven?
It's on page 19.
19. Thank you.
Okay, did you add a citation? Show how to add the citation. I just muted that. Did that. Okay, if this is on page 19, I've got to figure out how I'm going to cite this. Do I need Frederick Douglass's name in the in-text citation the way that they've written it out? No, why not?
You're writing about.
It's got Douglass's name right there. I am assuming you've probably used Douglass's name a lot in your paper. If you continue to cite from Douglass, you don't need to cite his last name. If you've already said it a million, you've already said it once and it's very clear that this is coming from Douglass's book. So we need a page number. Where do we put? So we got a page number, we've got a period, and we've got a quotation mark. In which order am I putting these to make it correct? Katie?
Quotation number.
There we go. Just like that. So do you see how there's no punctuation right there? You're kind of including the citation as part of the sentence. So the sentence ends after the citation. Also, there's a space there. I don't know if that's very clear. So it goes space like normal. 19. Almost like 19 is the final word. So make sure you've got it written right on that folder on paper so that you can practice that. All those citations. Did I cover it up? It's okay. Hopefully you're following along. Is it not on page 19?
Oh, never mind.
It is, okay, this is again. Okay, now let's talk about the next part of paragraph structure. So you've got the topic sentence, you've cited it correctly. You need an introduction and context for your evidence. So you need to say what is going on at this point in the book. You don't want to just drop them into the quotation without letting them know a little bit about what's happening. You need direct evidence. Your whole paper is a rhetorical analysis, meaning you are analyzing how Frederick Douglass is saying things. So if you don't use direct quotations, you're not actually going to be able to analyze how he is saying things, right? So you got to use direct evidence, cited right, and then you're going to have commentary about two things. So in a rhetorical analysis, you are commenting on how his language is building the argument and how his language is affecting his audience. And those are the things that you did in your presentations really well when you were breaking it down and you were saying, here's how, this specific word is going to affect us because of its connotations, or here's what this word adds to the argument because of its denotation and where it exists in the sentence. You were really good at doing that out loud. So now you just need to do that on the page as well. So let's look at an example let's look at a bad example. So this is the same one. Metaphors are used to show the negative change that came over slaveholders. Douglass describes how slavery changed this soul for the worse, saying, fatal poison of irresponsible power was already in her hands and soon commenced its infernal work. By using this metaphor, Douglass provides a more vivid image of the slow corruption of the slaveholder. He says that Mrs. Old used to be a nice, kind person, but once she became a slave owner, she was poisoned by slavery and became more devilish. From the first moment that she decided to own another person, she was corrupted. Now, I'm naming this as the bad example. And over here it says summary versus analysis. Am I, in any part of this sentence, am I saying why this sentence would be effective? There's nothing in my commentary that is talking about Douglass's language and why it is effective. Instead, I'm merely summarizing what the sentence says in a bunch of different words. I'm saying, oh yeah, look, he's saying she used to be nice and she's not anymore. I even use some of the same language that he uses without really examining what that language really means.
And saying he's poisoned by, I'd say she was poisoned by slavery and became more devilish. I'm looking at that word infertile, but I'm not explaining that to the audience, that infertile might be devilish and why that word would have a great effect on her. And I say from the first moment that she decided to own another person, she was corrupted. Again, that's what the sentence is saying. Fatal poison of irresponsible power. She owns another person, soon commences infernal work, is corrupted. So I'm just in a few different sentences saying Douglas's sentences over and over again. And it sounds okay. I mean, I think the language sounds okay. The prose is fine, you know, but you're not quite doing analysis yet. So analysis is when you look at what somebody else has said and you divide it into sections and you think about why the way they said it was effective. Make sense? So you look at his sentence and you say, okay, what in the way he said this works so well? Why did he choose the word infernal? Why did he choose the word irresponsible? Why poison as a metaphor? And you as the writer are explaining all of those things to your audience. Here is why he chose poison. Here is why he chose the word infernal. Here is how it is going to affect his audience. So on your goldenrod paper, I wrote down the bad paragraph for you, and I gave you a big long space on the back. And I want you to write some analysis of that sentence now. So try and write 3 sentences that add analysis to this paragraph. Then you're looking at why he made these choices and why they are effective. You're trying to write at least 3 sentences of analysis to this.
Okay, in your groups, I want you to share your analysis now. And so what you're going to do is you're going to read it out loud to them and kind of show them, almost like a picture book. Like, you know how you show little kids the pictures as you're reading it? So you're gonna sit with your group and you're gonna say, this is what I wrote, but you're reading it out loud to them. And then you're going to explain to them why it's analysis. So you're like, this is what I wrote, and here is why this is analysis. That make sense? Okay, go ahead, try it. Okay, so they should be able to see it and hear it.
Okay. Like comparing fatal or offensive poison, power that we all have like is a strong because of poison and something else that causes it shows that it kills it. It's not instant and the effect slowly everything. So this is analysis because instead of losing like gravity blood, I told why the ritual. Yeah, that's the hard time. You know?
So that kind
I think it was very analytical. Hey, was yours analytical? Yeah. Each page is total freedom of work. Not bad at all.
Okay, I have just handed out. I just handed out examples from student work. I had AP Lang write this paper a couple weeks ago, and so I've just pulled from their essays some good examples of paragraphs to show you guys. It says, metaphors are also used to show the negative, blah, 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 blah. All right, starting at the citation is where I started changing it. So here's the good example of analysis. By using this metaphor, Douglas provides a more vivid image of the slow corruption of the slaveholder. The fatal poison is slavery. I didn't notice the typo. Slavery and the power Mrs. Old has over her slaves. By using the metaphor of poison as slavery, Douglas shows that this change doesn't happen overnight, that the slow building of prejudice and a thirst for power inside the heart of a slaveholder rots them from the inside out, just like poison. Using poison as a metaphoric term for slavery also tells the reader that slaveholders allow themselves to become cruel. Poison isn't like a knife or a gun. No one else actually does the thing that kills you. When you ingest poison, you die from inside out factors. First, it corrupts the inside, which will later impact your exterior. Similarly, slaveholders become morally and spiritually corrupted because they allow themselves to be cruel to their slaves. They allow themselves to adopt the prejudice of other slaveholders, and they allow themselves to think of slaves as inferior to themselves. I also really like the parallelism of this. Isn't that nice? Anyway, ultimately, by using this metaphor, Douglas shows that slavery slowly corrupts slaveholders and that slaveholders allow themselves to change for the worse. So someone, it's good, isn't it? Okay, someone tell me why that's analysis rather than summary. Okay. Yeah, okay, good. So she's connecting the poison also then to the larger story, the larger themes. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know that Douglas was thinking about this idea about interior and exterior corruption, you know, when he used that metaphor. But that's what the writer is bringing to the text, and that's why it makes reading the analysis more interesting, because she's adding more to what Douglas said and explaining why what Douglas said works. Yeah.
And goes into depth on what he's actually saying.
Yeah, and it's not like she doesn't spend much time with infernal or irresponsible. She's instead just focusing on fatal poison because that's what's important to her in this, to talk about the metaphor.
I think she could have talked about infernal and irresponsible, but what I love is that by just focusing on that one thing, she has so much to say about the one thing. I think sometimes when we're writing these, we might say poison because, you know, it corrupts the inside and then move on. But she really sticks with that and explains it piece by piece and finds out all that she could say about this one thing so that it gives that feeling of depth. Okay, I think we should do one more. So on your goldenrod sheets, there's another example of an incomplete paragraph.
No, you know what? I don't think we should do one more. I think you've kind of got it. I'm hoping at least. So I'm going to give you the rest of class now. You've got 20 minutes to keep working on your own papers. You should have that time. These papers are due November 22nd, so you've got a week. But the more you can do today, the better it's going to be. And if you need some help, call me over. And if you need some inspiration, there's a couple great paragraphs on this blue sheet. Okay, go ahead. I'll gather them at the end. Sorry. Joel, how do you forget to gather those golden ray sheets now that you've done them? They're good points for your grades. But I don't want them from you.
One second, I'm gonna pause the recording.
Okay, so that was it for today. You're going to do the goldenrod sheet. It won't be goldenrod for you. You're going to do the sheet that's on the Canvas assignment. And you're going to do the first analysis. So there's 2 paragraphs that I say fix the analysis. You only need to do the first one. And then you can spend the rest of your time that you would spend for this class just working on your Douglas essay. So let me know if you've got any questions.